Good morning, Dan. How are you?
Very good. How are you? Thanks for having me on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for coming on. It's great. It's great to see you again. I guess to get started, I want to ask you about your book, which, if anyone's watching on the video, it's called "The Beauty of a Diamond," and you had a long, uh, a long experience in your life as being a baseball coach. So, what inspired you to write the book?
Um, I think for me, it was writing's always been a part of my life, and I decided to write the book and really share a lot of my coaching experience, um, and wanted to be able to share that with younger coaches who are getting into the game and that sort of stuff. And it really turned into a memoir of my coaching career, and then also what led me to kind of turn the page on my coaching career and start a new chapter as well. So all in all, the book was originally released in 2012, and then I added 10 chapters to it and re-released it last July. Um, so it was really like an 18-year project till it was
Wow.
till it's all said and done. Because I initially
Wow.
started writing it in 2003, and it with coaching as much as I was, and running I ran a youth nonprofit organization for 30 years and put a lot of hours in there. So it was just kind of carving out the time to be able to write, is what took so long. But truthfully, as you reflect back on it, um, you know, it, it wasn't done until 2012. And then, it really wasn't completely done until, 2021.
Wow.
And I just wanted to, you know, make people understand that you're so much more than just, someone out there teaching the X's and O's of the game, of
Mm.
regardless of what sport you're coaching. Whether you want to be or not, you're a mentor to these kids. You're a second parent in many cases. And, let's face it, everybody's competing in a sport to win. That's a given, but it's not only about winning. And I always took an approach that it was really about teaching life lessons through the game, because at some point in these kids' lives, they're not going to be able to play the game anymore. And that comes at various stages in their lives. Some of them it's after high school, some it's after college, some that are fortunate enough to go on and play professionally. It may be sometime in the minor leagues, or if they're good enough to make it to the big leagues, they're still, the game is going to say you can no longer compete here. Whether you
Yes.
want it to or not, it's
Yes.
not your decision. And at that point, you've got to figure out how you contribute to society. You've got to be a good human being, to go out and, you know, get a regular job, so to speak. The person interviewing you is not going to care what you did on the baseball field. They're going to want to know, are you a team player in this atmosphere? Are you going to help this business win at what we're trying to accomplish as an organization?
Yes.
Um, and that's really the one thing that we really wanted to stress to our kids throughout our organization. And that's the main reason why I wanted to write the book, to just share that philosophy.
Well, there are so many things that I want to ask you in relation to that. I guess where I'll start is, so what was your experience as an athlete when you were younger before you got into coaching?
So I was, I tell everybody I was far from a superstar. I played multiple sports. I played football, soccer, basketball, and baseball. And I worked, worked really hard to get on the field and stay on the field. I was probably a better football player than I was a baseball player, but I loved the game of baseball. So just to stay in the starting lineup, I had to work, really, really hard. So I was always working
Mhm.
hard in practice. I was always hustling on and off the field, and I never took anything for granted. Um, and there were a couple coaches in my life that really made a huge impact on me. Um, you know, One was, my first little league coach, Jerry Heist, and Barry DiStaggio. I was the youngest player on our little league team. So, my mom was involved with the organization and somehow pulled some strings to get me playing a year prior than, what the age limit was to be. And, so I was the youngest kid on the team. So again, right out of the gate, I had to work harder than
Yeah.
everybody else because everybody, the difference between an 8-year-old and a 9-year-old or 9-year-old, 10-year-old is a big
It's
deal at
big.
that stage, so I had to really work hard. And, it's funny. I remember, and I write about this experience in the book. I, I never, early on, I never swung the bat. I would just go up there and either I was going to walk or I was going to strike out, depending on whether I got 4 balls thrown to me or 3 strikes thrown to me first. But I would not swing the bat. And I remember I came up in a situation, we had the bases loaded, and it was either a tie game or a down a run or something. And, we had 2 outs, and my coach, Jerry Heist, comes down the third base line. And again, knowing the history of my, my at bats at this stage of the season, I guess he didn't want to rely on whether or not the pitcher would throw me 4 balls before he threw me 3 strikes. So he came up to me, he knelt down, he put his arm around me. He says, Danny, everybody called me Danny back then yet. He says, you're never going to get a hit if you don't swing the bat. And I was just like, okay. So at that point, like, I was determined, like, I was swinging the bat at this next pitch, regardless of where it was going to be. And thankfully, the kid threw me a strike, and I made contact and drove the ball into right field, probably because I was late, and ended up hitting a base clearing double. And from that point on, I turned from the least aggressive hitter to a guy that, like, if I saw 2 pitches in an at bat, it was too many for me at that point, So I was in there looking to swing. And, it's funny, at such a young age, how that's just stuck to me. And really, even in different stages of my life, metaphorically has stuck with me where, take a chance and see what happens. So that really impacted me deeply. And then, another coach, funny that I never actually really played for him. I was at Ole High School in Pennsylvania my freshman year, and the high school baseball coach there was a legend, Bob Rentschler. And my older brother had played for him, so we had a relationship. And then we ended up moving to a different school district midway through the year. So I never actually played a game for him, but I competed against him. And after every game, after we went through the line and shook hands and that sort of stuff, he would stop me and just ask, how are your parents doing? How's your brother doing? How's the family? How are things going? And again, just made an incredible impact on me because, what did it matter to him? That here was a kid from another school district who, his older brother played for him, but he never played for him. But, took the time, made his team wait in the huddle, for 2-3 minutes to just, check up on how things were doing for me. And then, lastly was my actual high school coach at Schuylkill Valley, Denny Warner. He just, again, was one of those guys who, we had some really good teams, but was really there to teach us the life lessons and, that it was more than a game. So those guys all had, kind of grew into what my coaching style became.
Well, it sounds like you have some pretty good role models there because I think that generally speaking, I would say that seems to be the exception rather than the rule in terms of what I see in that youth sports space now in terms of, and I always say this is people coach the way that they were coached. And typically the reflection is that sort of old school, sort of stereotypical coaches who are, do as I say. And, I run the ship here and they're not really looking at they're coaching a game. They're not coaching the people, which you've described as people who are coaching people and showing that they care. And it is fascinating to me, the story, particularly the first story you told about when you were 12, when playing Little League, how those stories those stick with us, right? They're so ingrained in our brain 30, 40, 50 years later from these youngest of ages where these people in our lives made such a big impression. And I couldn't help but think about that idea of taking risk, right? And judging performance based upon the effort, right? Rather than the results,
Right.
and saying, hey, you're going to only fail if you don't swing.
Right.
Even if you swing and you miss, you've succeeded. And that's not something that's really taught. Yes, we play sports to win, but things aren't always going to go our way. So are you going to take that shot and be the one who's willing to risk it all, emotionally to be successful? Or are you going to be so afraid of failure that you kind of sit on the sidelines and you keep your metaphorical bat on your shoulder?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's so true. And again, it's so true. And yet it's so bizarre, especially in the games of baseball and softball, because they are games of failure,
correct.
So the fact that, there are so many coaches nowadays who are coaching for the result as opposed to the process is just mind boggling. I know, when we ran, part of what we did with our nonprofit is we ran a sports complex and we hosted, baseball and softball tournaments every weekend. And you got to see the best and the worst of both worlds. Like you're just there and you're looking at some of these guys and you're like, man, what are you doing? I remember specifically a time where this was a 12 and under team came into our tournament. Apparently they were undefeated going into this. It was late in the year, so like, I don't know, something stupid like 35-0 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those teams. At 12 years old, you're just going out and recruiting the biggest, fastest, strongest kids, and you're going to compete regardless of what those kids may not even be high school players at that time because they can't adapt.
Yep.
But they made it to the championship game of our tournament and ended up losing by 1 run. I just remember the coach taking these kids out to left field and just berating these kids for like 30 minutes. And I'm just like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm like, these kids tuned out, 2 minutes into your speech, and funny thing about it is my style was always, my speeches after a loss were short. After a win, we talk a lot, but after a loss, like we already all feel terrible,
right?
Especially if it's a loss that we know we should have won, So everybody knows what we did.
Don't pile on.
Right. So it's just like at that point, I want to get out of there. I know they want to get out of there. It's like, hey, we didn't bring our best game today, guys. Let's show up better next time. Forget about this, and let's get packed up.
Yeah, but I think for me, those types of coaches, which they exist, there's plenty of them around. To me, that speech in that case and in any case like that is about the coach and not about the team.
Yes.
Right. So he's making it about himself and his ego's getting in the way. Meanwhile, you've got a group of 12-year-olds who just developmentally are going to tune out even if things are good.
Right.
Exactly. Right. Now you're going to go and berate them after they sat on a field for 2 hours trying to keep their attention and they feel bad enough. And now you've just completely sort of distorted their experience by, berating them. So unfortunately, we still see those things. And it's part of the reason I do what I do. I guess so for you as a player, at what point did your baseball career end?
So I never played. Well, I didn't go to college. I went to a trade school, so I didn't have the opportunity to play in college. So I played in high school. Then I played in an amateur league, for many years. After that, hanging on to the dream, so to speak. But that's actually really how our organization started. It started as an adult amateur team because I wanted to continue playing. I like I said, I went to a trade school. I thought I was going to be a record producer. That didn't pan out the way I wanted it to, but I still don't regret the decision or the experience. So it was really about me being able to play a little bit longer. And then, through starting this team, I was kind of thrown in to being the coach right out of the gate, which was very odd because I'm coaching guys that I graduated high school with. I'm coaching guys that were, a couple years older than me, and I didn't want to coach. Like that wasn't, the
Right.
idea was start this thing so I could play more, not to coach. But I did take it seriously right out of the gate, and I had the opportunity to coach two guys uh, that were actually former professionals in
Uh-huh.
that organization in the early years of us starting.
Uh-huh.
And those two guys as well, Tim Brill and Rick Dunham, molded my philosophy. Like they were the final touches, after, the Jerry Heiss and Barry
Right.
DeStagio and,
Right, right.
Bob Rentschler and Denny Werner. So, because they really, brought a professional level to our organization.
Yep.
And the respect that they showed me as a very young coach, and these are both guys that, Tim was probably like 14 years older than me. Rick was probably 6 or 7 years older than me. And, they knew a wealth, had a wealth more knowledge of the game of baseball than what I did at that age.
Sure.
But they treated me with the utmost respect. And it was just such an incredible experience and really molded how I wanted to continue coaching and, what I wanted to establish as, really the framework and fundamentals of our organization because
Mm-hmm.
um, that slowly evolved into me then coaching youth players and, coaching American Legion baseball. And then our organization just kind of continued to morph. And there are a bunch of us that played with each other that were all coaching at different organizations throughout our county. And, we just kind of got around to talking at one point. It's like, this is kind of crazy. Like we all have the same philosophy. We all have, you know, really the same things that we're teaching, but we're competing against each other and then playing with each other yet. Let's start a youth organization, under this umbrella, under the Berkshire Baseball and Softball
Mm-hmm.
umbrella. And then that's what we did. And that's when it really, um, you know, when I really took it seriously and took it to a next level and understanding immediately the impact that I had on the kids we were coaching.
I have to say, we have a lot more in common than I even realized. So I played high school baseball as well. I started for 2 years. I thought I was a pretty good player, but my family just didn't have the resources. We didn't have the knowledge about college then. My coach was not very cooperative, not in a bad way. He didn't really help with recruiting. And so I stopped playing at the end of high school and I went to college and that was it. And then at 25 years old, I was presented the opportunity to start playing in adult leagues again. And I played for probably the good part of 17 years after that. So I played from probably 25 to 42. And in that run, I've played for a number of teams. And in that run, I ended up being the manager of one of those teams. And I couldn't help but chuckle when you said it because I remember I just wanted to play baseball. And then you become the manager, which, it was less about being a coach for us because it was competitive. Don't get me wrong. We played against really good players. And I learned more about the game of baseball as a player as an adult than I did in high school, right? Like I
Yeah.
played with some really, like to your experience, minor league players, played against guys who were pros, played with guys who played in college. And I learned more about the game of baseball as a player from 25 to 42 than I learned in my youth. And it also, as a coach, which I'm sure you had this experience, my ability to put myself in a young person's shoes when they fail is much that's probably the greatest asset I have as a coach is I played baseball for 17 years and I was humbled as an adult. It's very fresh in my mind. So when I see a young kid go out there and get humbled or they don't succeed, I'm able to sort of put myself right into that situation and go, you know what? I had those days where I couldn't do anything right. And I stared at the ceiling in bed as a grown man with kids in their, bedrooms sleeping, thinking about, well, why did I swing at that pitch on 3-2? Or why did I let that go? I mean, that's a really uncanny thing because there's a lot of guys who play competitive baseball and they play college baseball and then they try to coach baseball when they're in 30s and 40s and they're 20 years removed from the game. And even though they were really good at it, they can't relate.
Right.
They can't relate to what the player's going through because it's either been so long or they were so successful that they can't get it that when someone fails, it's like, well, why didn't you just do that? Well, goddamn, baseball's a hard game, you know?
Yeah. I noticed that with a lot of guys, and I'm not saying every guy, but a lot of guys who were former professionals and come back in the youth ranks, they can't relate. Like they can't relate to that fail because it came so easy to them. And again, not
Exactly.
all of them. There's some who get it, and even though they were incredibly successful, can still understand and relate. But there's a lot that I've seen that you know it's like, and even those guys, you hear them a lot of times talk about, well, when I played, we did, and it's like, kid doesn't care about that. He just
No.
doesn't care about that at this point in time. Like, how do I not do
Right. It's
what I
not it's not
just
about
did?
right. It's not about them. It's about meeting the person where they're at,
Right.
help them solve their problem, get to where they want to go. Now, there may be a place to share that experience, but it has to be a relevant,
Exactly.
context. If you're just saying like, "Hey, this is what I did," because you want to, pat yourself on the back to show your player how special you were when you played, that ain't doing anything.
Doesn't matter. Yeah. Yeah. So it is interesting. It's funny that, we obviously can relate to that
Yeah.
concept for sure.
So tell me about your coaching career. So when did you? I mean, obviously you had the organization and you were coaching, in your younger years as an amateur coach, right? The experience that you had, but like, tell me about the progression as a coach, like how you sort of developed over time.
So the first youth team that I ever coached was American Legion team. So high school age kids, and we were bad. We were really really bad. I think we went 1-21 that year.
Mm.
Um, but I still actually look back on that season as a success because we were much better, at the end of the season than what we were in the beginning of
Hmm.
the season. And I think that first year, again, it was humbling. Um, and I think it was exactly what I needed as a new coach because I think if you go in and you're fortunate enough to go in and coach just a team of studs and they go
Hmm.
out and they're playing you know 750 or 800 baseball the whole season, you just take it for granted. Um, so it's still one of my best experiences as a coach because I learned so much. And the following year we won 4 games, and then the next year we won 12 games, and the next year we won like 15 games or something. Um, so we were progressively getting better, um, and I really attribute later on then when I was coaching some really good teams to again stay focused and humbled because of those 4 years, teaching a not so great team,
Hmm.
but it was a not so great team with some really great kids, and that was just what it was, and so it just again learning from that experience, it just I was able to always keep things in perspective, always making sure that our highs never got too high and our lows
Hmm.
never got too low, and understanding that we were going to go through some good streaks and some bad streaks, but myself as the coach had to stay level because the kids are feeding off of you. So
Of
if
course.
you're an emotional
Hmm.
roller coaster during a losing streak or a winning streak or whatever, they're all over the place as well. And remember people talking about Bobby Cox. If you ever looked in the dugout, when and Joe Torre as well. If you ever looked in the dugout of any of those guys, yeah, it did.
Yeah.
You couldn't tell.
Their facial expression was the same
Are
regardless
they
of
up
situation
seven? Are
ever.
they down seven? Is Smoltz
Yes.
throwing a no hitter? It was the same
Right.
thing, and that's the way I tried to,
Yes.
to keep it.
Yeah.
And I think that definitely helped throughout my career.
Yeah. So I guess I'm curious, you obviously coaching is such a huge part of your life. Now, ultimately, you get to a point where you decided to not coach anymore. So, like, take me through that. Like, when did you start to think, hey, maybe it was time to move on? Or, like, did you have a plan for exiting rather than just sort of waking up one day and say, I don't want to coach anymore? Like, how did that work out for you?
Um, So there definitely wasn't an exit plan. If you would have asked me, in 2018, I would tell you that, I'll probably, die somewhere on the field. Um, you know,
Not a bad plan, by the way.
yeah. And then in 2019, I took two solo trips where I drove from Pennsylvania. The first one was from Pennsylvania down to Dallas for the ABCA convention, the American
Okay.
Baseball Coaches
Yes.
Association convention. From there, I went from Dallas over to Sulphur, Louisiana. I spent some time with some friends, and then drove home. And about a month and a half after that, I drove to Orlando, Florida, and drove back for a soccer camp that we were working on doing at the complex. And that was the first time in my life where I really took my time and enjoyed the journey. We traveled a lot as an organization. We would go out and play in tournaments in Las Vegas and Florida and
Mm-hmm.
Atlanta
I
and
did that. It was,
all points in between. And there was always such a regimented schedule. It's like we would take a bus to the airport. So it's like, all right, everybody's got to be on the bus by this time. We got to be at the airport at this time. If we're, traveling bus all the way, it was like whenever we'd make a stop, kids had this much time to get in and out and back on the road. So never really enjoyed the journey, so to speak.
yeah.
And I was able to do that on those two trips. And, my mom, when she was in her mid 40s and the mid 80s, she had quit her job. She had a very successful career selling life insurance.
Hmm.
And she quit her job and took an old 1967 Plymouth Valiant, took the back seat out of it, stuck a sheet of plywood in there and a mattress, and cruised around the country just visiting people and volunteering and doing all this stuff.
Wow.
And I always admired her. I loved telling people, the
Yeah.
story about her and all that sort of stuff, but never in my wildest dreams would I ever say or think that my story would mirror her story. And on that trip, it like hit me where I was like, wow, man, I think I've figured out why mom really did this. Like there was just such a serenity in those drives.
Mhm.
And when I got back, it was in the process when I was adding the 10 chapters to the first book.
Yeah.
And I wrote like I hadn't written in years. And it's when it kind of hit me, almost as if it was, a voice from God or a higher power saying, you know what, you've done your time here.
Yeah.
It's time to turn the page and start a new
Yeah.
chapter. And I did not embrace that at first. Like it was a struggle to really buy
Sure.
into it because
Sure.
I'd put my entire life into this organization. I mean, at that point,
Hmm.
um, I'd just turned 50, so it was literally 60% of my time on earth I spent putting blood, sweat, and tears into this organization. And we were
Yeah.
doing amazing work, helping kids.
Yeah.
And, but I, teetered back and forth and then finally kind of bought in, ran it by my wife. She thought I lost my mind. Um, but later on, due to some stuff she was going through professionally as well, um, she, she bought in then after a couple months, and we let the organization know it'd be the last year, and
Hmm.
kind of went from there. And the one thing that's been so cool about what we're doing now, traveling around in an RV and volunteering and just meeting new people and reconnecting with old people, are the number of opportunities I've had to sit down and have lunch or breakfast or dinner, or just hang out at a campground with one of my old players, whether they're in Arizona or Atlanta or Maryland, Texas, you name it. And again, you can relate to this as a coach. I mean, look, there's a lot of times we're putting our life into this, and we're planting seeds in these kids, but many times we don't necessarily see those seeds bloom. You know, and this
Hmm.
journey has allowed me to see those seeds bloom. And, I've coached kids that, you know, are just so incredibly successful at what they're doing,
Hmm.
doctors and lawyers and entrepreneurs and Kids who are still in the game. I've got a former player of mine as the assistant general manager for the Houston Astros.
Wow.
I've got one that's director of baseball operations for the Toronto Blue Jays.
Very cool.
But even apart from the ones in the game yet, are just the ones who are out there making an impact. I have a kid who's actually a rehab catcher for the Reds out in Arizona. But what I'm most proud of him about is the fact that he's also, on the board of this organization out there that gives out scholarships to kids.
Mm-hmm.
So when you see that, it's really fulfilling and really, kind of cements. I mean, because again, you can relate to this as a coach. There's not a whole line of people, praising you as a youth coach.
Nope. In many ways, it's a thankless job.
Yes. So most of the feedback you get is because Johnny or Susie isn't playing, or they are playing, but they should be batting third, not eighth, or whatever the case is.
Well,
this is like, just just reaffirming that, things were done the right way, and it was the life lessons that these kids were taught that matters.
Right. Yeah. I mean, listen, you don't expect it, right? But when it does come back, it's a really nice feeling. It's funny. I coached my son who's kind of moved on from baseball, or put it this way, like I just don't have the opportunities to coach him anymore. His future in baseball is sort of unclear, but that's fine. Whatever he wants to do is good with me. But when I was young, from the time he was 5 all the way up till this last rec baseball season in the spring, I coached every year. And I just remember one year where I had one of his buddies, like a close buddy of his now. And at the end of the year, I got a handwritten note from the kid. I don't know if it was unprompted or prompted by his mother, but I guess it doesn't matter. It was just like, I just had such a good time playing for you. You're my favorite coach. And like, I just remember putting that up on my wall in my office and being like, you know what, man, if I get one of these for the rest of my life, like it was worth it. Right. Like, hey, I made a difference in this kid's life. Like he saw the value in it. His parents saw the value in it. And like, that's all I need, and if I didn't get it, it would be fine too. Cause I just love being there with them, but to get some feedback and a reward like that is pretty cool. And so for you to be in a position to really revisit, relationships that you had when they were younger and hear from them about what they're doing and just see them succeeding, it's got to be really, really cool.
It is. It's been the best thing about what we're doing by far.
Yeah. So, before we started recording here, a couple of days ago, I was looking at your website and checking out what you're doing, beyond, traveling the country. And I saw that you did a podcast with the former Red Sox Shea Hillenbrand, who was a player that I recall certainly as a baseball fan and a Yankee fan. So I think you're a Red Sox fan. So we've sort of got that in common, even if it's on the other side, different sides of the fence. But I didn't realize what he had gone through personally. And, that's the flip side of this, right? A lot of athletes, and I've had a lot of athletes on my podcast who've gone through that challenge of transitioning out of sport, right? You don't know when it's going to end. And if you don't have a clear purpose in that next phase of life, it could really it could really lead to some significant life challenges, which he went through. I mean, he talked about it openly, so I'm not speaking out of school here.
Right.
I mean, can you talk about that experience, just like being able to talk to somebody like that and get to know somebody who had that kind of life and that is now sort of on the other side helping people?
Yeah. And I was introduced to Shea through a mutual friend when we were running the complex yet. And the initial relationship was, to try to get him to come out to our complex and help us with a camp or something like that. And it just never panned out because of timing or whatever. But we were still in touch with each other, friends on Facebook and whatnot. And when we got out to Arizona in the fall, I had reached out to him. I'm like, Shea, hey, we're in town. This is what we're doing now. I don't know if you'd heard. I'd love to get together, grab lunch, and, hopefully we can do a podcast if you'd be willing to.
Awesome.
And he was more than willing. We got together, had lunch, and immediately clicked, almost as, this was really our first time meeting in person. Everything else had been, through emails or text messages or whatever, and just immediately clicked. And, to hear his story is just so incredible. So it was an honor for him to be able to open up and be vulnerable like that,
Definitely.
on the show. And, again, we stay in contact even now after that. Um, so again, I've always, I always look at the human more so than the
There you go.
player, So, I mean,
Hmm.
our organization, we had the opportunity to, a lot, toward the end, we started bringing our alumni in for our guest speakers at our banquet. But in the early days, we would bring former players in. And, so we had guys like Bill Ripken come in and speak, who is, again, an absolutely amazing human being, through and through. Crazy guys like, Bill Lee, we had at our
The
banquet.
spaceman.
Yeah. And he was just hilarious. And, just all kinds of people. And again, it just reiterated our teaching philosophy, um, of we wanted to create good humans,
Yep.
even more so
There
than
you
good
go.
good players. We had one speaker, I won't mention his name, who was a huge disappointment. And again, it was
Mm,
just like, you know, um, I don't care what you did on the field because
right.
you're kind of a peckerhead. you know?
Hmm.
But fortunately, that was one guy out of probably
Right.
12,
It's the
12 big
exception,
leaguers
not
that
the
we came
rule.
in, right?
Yeah.
So that just, again, drove home the fact that what we were doing as an organization was right, that we
Hmm.
wanted to teach these kids to be good humans first and foremost.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, that's all that matters. Doesn't matter what you did on the field.
Yeah.
You got to be a good human. So again, to share that time with Shay, I mean, and I bet you we were together for a good 3 hours. We had lunch and then we went back to the RV and
Recorded.
sat down and recorded, and it was just a really truly humbling experience that he was willing to take that much time out of his day and just tell his story and hopefully inspire some of my listeners.
Uh, I mean, listen, I can completely relate to that from your perspective. I relate to it from his perspective, and to him, I would echo the fact that much credit to him, right? As a former professional athlete, right? It's a very challenging and humbling thing to sort of, you know, explore your shortcomings publicly,
Yeah.
right? But to be able to embrace it and say, if I talk about this openly, it's going to help other people. And it sounds like he's living a life of service now outside of baseball, which is probably part of the healing process, right? For a lot of guys, and I had one gentleman in particular on my podcast. He was a former college football player, was very, very Division I, very successful, had like everything was in the NFL basket for him. And he talked about it. And when he had to retire because of a back injury. And he went through a period of 4 or 5 years where he was like addicted to drugs and he was suicidal. He tried suicide. And ultimately it wasn't until he figured out that his calling was to help other people that his life got back on track. And I think for a lot of athletes, a lot of them either don't anticipate that or they resist it, right? And they live in the past of I was an athlete and this is sort of what I want to relive the glory days rather than saying like, what can I do next that gives me the same level of meaning and purpose as I had when I was an athlete? Because that's hard to replicate,
Yeah, it is.
because of all the energy and effort, time, money, all the things you put into being a professional athlete or being a high level athlete. And then it's all ended. It's like, well, now what do I do? And what does my life mean that it's over? It's a really, really challenging thing.
Yeah, and you see it all the time. You see it with celebrities, with athletes, with
Yeah.
musicians, and it just again just reiterates that whole thing that it's more than about the glory. It's more than about
Mm-hmm.
what you did. So how are you going to react when the lights are off? How are you going to react when the spotlight isn't on you? Um, and it's so important. I mean, look at like who would have ever thought that Robin Williams was dealing with depression for all
Right.
those years. The guy who
You never know.
made a living by making other people laugh, but yet there was something he was missing. You know, so I think that's so important that you know guys really need to understand that there's more than just the game. There's more about that, and that's what was so cool with, how humble Shea was, and
Yeah.
talking about, what did he say early on is, hey, if anybody out there is listening, wants to know how you can blow $30 million or whatever it is, I'm your guy. I can help you with that. So again, to have the humility to say that, to say,
Right.
what, yeah, I did that. Like I literally did that is,
Yeah.
pretty special.
Yeah. But I think it comes back to what you were saying about your objective as a coach, which is to coach young people or people in general to be better humans, right? We're all human, right? At the end of the day, we put so much stock in what we do, right? And that's such a big part of our identity, but at the end of the day, we're all the same, right? Whether you played professional baseball or not, or whether you're rich or you're poor, right? We're all human, and how do we find commonality in that versus the idea that, status and money and whatever are somehow elevate us over the next person. And I think that's the value, that secret sauce, right? In these conversations with people, is to be able to relate at a human level. And I think that, that's, I wouldn't say it's the exception, but it's definitely not the rule in our society. And I think the beauty of podcasting, and maybe you could sort of comment on this as a podcaster as well. Like, I think the beauty of podcasting for me has been the ability to have these sorts of really significant, deep, substantive conversations with people I, most cases, don't even know. And I don't have these kinds of conversations with the people in my life, And so for me, it's been such an eye opener of like, I want to get to know this person as much as I can. I may never see them again, but I'm so curious about who they are. I mean, is that like, what's your been experience as a podcaster? Because it looks like you have some really interesting people too on your podcast, people that you probably wouldn't anticipate.
Yeah. Exactly what you said. It's an opportunity, and it's funny. I mean, a lot. I have a lot of guests that I do have relationships with.
Right.
Many times when we get together with one of my old players, it's hey,
Right.
let's do a
Let's,
podcast too,
yeah,
so
let's
we can share
record.
that story. Um, so it's really more recently that I've really started kind of getting out of my comfort zone and,
Mhm.
reaching out, the way we connected through Podmatch and,
Yeah, it's great.
engaging, guests that I normally wouldn't have on the show. And like you said, it's incredible how you can have, some very deep, meaningful conversations with people
A
that
stranger.
you really don't know that well.
Yeah.
Um, so it is. It's really amazing, and that's what I love about it is being able to to share those stories because if you look at my guest list, it's just a broad range from
Mhm.
former major league player to former Olympic softball players, to other full time RVers to you know
Mhm.
um, you know recovering drug addicts,
Mhm.
and all of those stories can inspire others. Every single one of those stories can inspire others. And that's really, why I do it is because I think everyone has a story and I think they can
Yes.
all inspire someone out there. So, I always look at it as, yeah, I'd love to have, you know, thousands and thousands of downloads of every episode and this and that. But
I
that's
love
really
that.
not my goal. My
Right.
goal really breaks down to like if one person from the conversation that I'm having, even this conversation here,
Yep.
if one person is inspired, if one person makes a change because of this conversation, then it's,
Yeah.
a success. Um, and, when you do get that feedback of, people who've listened to an episode and are like, man, that really made a huge impact on me.
Yes.
It's that same thing as when I get together with those players and they say, you know what,
Mhm.
I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for what I learned in the organization, playing for you and playing for others.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you say that because I definitely, as a podcaster, fight the urge. Because what I've seen is when I've had people on my podcast who are more recognizable, my download numbers go up, right? I'm looking at that, but it's not the objective, right? And I fight the urge of trying to find bigger names. So for instance, like I won't say the name because I think it's I think it's an interesting podcast and a good idea. But there's another podcast out. I would say another podcast in youth sport space that's pretty new, but it's hosted by somebody high profile, and they have a lot of high profile guests. And I'm looking at this going like, it's great. It's a great conversation, but like that person doesn't know what I know just by virtue of my training and sort of the angle. And so I'm constantly looking at it going like, like, oh, like why are people listening to that and not me? And do I, and it's like, that's not the point,
Right.
right? It's
Right.
not the point. If I'm having these good conversations with people that are really genuine and interesting, it doesn't matter what their following is or who they can. That's not. I didn't get into this to get rich and make money. I did it because I enjoy the process of it. And if it happens to turn out that the outcomes are favorable in the end, whether it's a business outcome or whatever, that's great. But if that's what's going to drive me, I'm just going to probably burn out on it and move on because I'm chasing a result that I have no control over.
Right. Right. It's the same way as approaching coaching. It's
Yeah.
instead
Right.
of coaching for the win, you got to coach for the process. And that's
Yes.
really, again, my philosophy when it comes down to,
Agreed.
podcasting and everything else. It's the process, it's the process. And yes, I can definitely, relate to what you're saying there. And,
Yeah.
it is, you do have to kind of do a self check every once in a while. And be like, that's not
Right.
why we're doing this. And again, even with, the books I've published and all that sort of stuff as well. I want to sell books. It's, it helps
Of
me
course.
put gas in the tank and helps me,
Right.
drive to my next destination.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, it's really about just inspiring people,
Agreed.
and if we can do that on, a small basis or a large basis, whatever it is, that's absolutely fine.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned putting gas in the tank. So tell me, as a full-time RVer, somebody who's traveling the country and seeing everything, like just tell me what that experience is like in general.
It's incredible. I mean, this country has so much to offer. I mean, there are so many absolutely beautiful places and incredible people out there. And, our country is a little bit of a mess right now, as is the world. But if you're looking for good people, you can find them. And we've met so many just absolutely incredible, salt to the earth, amazing people on this journey. And that's been the best part about it. And, I remember when my mom passed away, reading her journals and the stories of people she met. And again, then after she passed away, getting letters from some of these people, just telling us how much of an impact she had on their life. And, I know that, many of these people had a huge impact on my mom's life because she would talk about them and tell stories about them. And for us to now be able to experience that, and again, have an even better understanding as to why mom did it and, what that was like is just incredible because at the end of the day, life is about the experiences. Life is about the people we meet, and really embracing the moment and, cherishing those one-on-one encounters that we have. I mean, there's people that I don't even remember their name anymore, but they made a profound impact on my life in literally just a, 10, 15, 20-minute conversation. And you just walk away and you're like, wow, man, that's a pretty cool person that we just, had the pleasure of meeting.
Yeah. So I know the next question I'm going to ask you is probably a throwaway in the sense that I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. It's kind of like asking if you have a favorite child, right? Like, do you have a favorite place that you visited?
People ask Sandy and I that question all the time, and we can't answer it. We really can't because there's so many incredible places, And if we think of one, then we're like, oh, but this place was cool too, So we've stopped we've even stopped trying to list even the top 5 because once you get to 5, you're like, well, wait, this place, could have been number 3 or something. So you really can't. Which I think just attests to how incredible of a country we live in, and
Yeah,
you know,
it's
just the beauty. I mean, it's incredible. It's all inspiring for sure.
yeah. So do you have places on your list that you haven't been to that you want to get to?
Yeah, and you know, there's places we've been to that you know we feel we didn't spend enough time in. You know,
Yeah,
so the list is ever changing. I mean, we
sure.
definitely want to get up to Alaska. We kind of have to work that around, you know, when our grandkids are graduating high school and that sort of thing. Because obviously, you know, June is the prime time. You know, I just think
Yeah,
it would be so cool, you know, to be up there and you're walking around at 10:30 at night and it's still
24 hours
daylight.
of light. Yeah.
Yeah, you know. Um, so that's definitely on the list. We haven't been to California yet. We kind of detoured around that last year because we took on a volunteer project that changed our route a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, we've been to 39 states so far. We kind of outlined the country to an extent, so we haven't hit you know the whole Midwest area, Missouri, you know, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Colorado. We haven't hit you know a lot of those states. Um, you know, so they're definitely on the list to get out
Mhm.
to the Rockies and um, you know that's that sort of stuff. I mean, we're up in New England in the fall when we first started it, and we want to get back up there, you know, in the summer
Mhm.
to enjoy it even more. I mean, the colors were incredible
Yeah.
in the fall, but we didn't get all the way up like
To
into Bar
Maine.
Harbor, Maine, and stuff. We just kind of went through the middle of it and then down toward Old Orchard Beach. You know, so we want to get back up there. Um, you know, so it's just it's a juggling act. You know,
Yeah.
between you know all the places on the list and then still you know fitting in the other stuff too.
How many so is are hitting baseball stadiums along the way, is that part of the agenda?
Only if it's you know an opportunity.
Okay.
Like when we were in Arizona, we went to an Arizona Fall League game in Surprise,
Very
which
cool.
was really cool. First time I ever you know experienced that. It was neat to see you know all the prospects from different teams playing in the game, and obviously all those facilities out there are just you know incredible.
I played out there. It was that complex out there. I played out there over 10 years ago, but when we played out there, it was like playing, like it was like heaven. It's like playing on the putting green, playing baseball. It was just amazing. And
Yeah,
it's, oh God. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that was really cool. You know, we got to Field of Dreams in Iowa, which was just
Wow.
exceeded. You know, I mean, I was expecting it to be cool, but it turned out to be like cooler than what I even thought. Like, I mean, there really is like a magical feeling when you get to that place, which was really cool. Um, but yeah, I mean, if the opportunity arises, yeah, we'll take advantage of it. You know, probably you know more so some minor league stadiums than
Yeah,
you know than big league
definitely.
stadiums. I mean, we actually stayed um, in Aberdeen in the parking lot of the Ironbird Stadium there
Yep.
for like 3 nights because we had an issue with our slide. And I know the general manager of the Ironbirds. I did a podcast with him, and
Oh, wow.
when I went in and you know sat down with him, I'm like, "Hey, Jack, by the way, we might be in your parking lot for a couple days because when we pulled in today, our slide stopped working midway in, midway out, so we really can't go anywhere. And getting a remote RV repairman out seems like it's going to be a couple day process." He
Yeah.
was like, "No
Yeah, no
problem,
worries.
no problem." You know,
Wow.
so we got to take in a game there, which was cool as well. You know, and we were down there for a tournament anyway. We were down there for a girls' baseball tournament. You know, so
Wow.
it was a cool experience to say that you know we stayed 3 days in the you know parking lot of the Aberdeen Ironbirds. You know?
Yeah.
So,
I I mean, clearly from all the experiences you've had and the way you've characterized it in the last, 55 minutes, I mean, you clearly have a very high level of awareness, right, about the significance of these events, experiences in your life. So, like, do you ever just sort of like wake up or just kind of catch yourself and be like, man, like, how did I get here? Like, just pinch yourself.
all the time, really. I
Yeah.
mean, all the time. It's just you know, again, it's you know, it's amazing. I mean, the relationships we've been able to build with people, and you know, people I met through the organization that we've
Mm.
been able to maintain, relationships with. One of the first volunteer projects we ever did was down in Sulphur, Louisiana, after Hurricane Laura came through.
Hmm.
And the last 4 years of our complex, at our complex, we'd been doing some softball camps with Jenny Finch.
Oh, wow.
And over the years, we became really good friends. And so we actually stayed in her driveway while we were, going
So,
back and forth, to help with the church we were helping at during the relief time. And again, she's one of the most amazing human beings you'll ever meet. I mean, just incredibly humble. I mean, she like their house made it through the hurricane pretty much unscathed. But
mm,
they live on a ranch, and like across the street, they had some buildings that were totally leveled. And like she was apologizing to me because they didn't have any power. They were running off a generator that we wouldn't be able to plug in at their house. And I'm like, Jenny, like we've got a generator, like we're good.
mm.
Like you've got much
Yeah.
larger problems to worry
Right.
about
Don't worry about
than
us.
us
Yeah.
being able to plug in. And we've gotten back to Sulphur and spent time with her almost as much as we've been back to Pennsylvania. So
Wow.
that's pretty
That's
cool to be
that's
able
very cool.
to do that. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely times where, I wake up and I'm like, man, this is just a blessed life. I mean, through what I've done through girls baseball, I've had the opportunity to meet many of the players that played in the old All American Girls Professional Baseball League. And to hear the stories of these women, who are now in their 80s and 90s, talking about what it was like to play, um, in the 40s is just, again, incredible and awe inspiring,
Yep.
So yeah, it's very special, and I'm very aware of how special it is.
That's great. All right. So as we wrap up, the last question I ask to all of my guests, and it sometimes it sort of comes from different angles, but it's generally the same, is if you had to give one piece of advice to somebody listening, let's take it back to the beginning. If you had to give one piece of advice to a coach, right? As a coach who had a long career coaching young people, like what's that one piece of advice that you would give them?
Um, I think it's just understand the big picture. It's not about you; it's about the kids, and that's that's really it. It's just understanding it's about the kids. It's not about you.
It's perfect. I couldn't have said it better.
Yeah,
Dan, I really enjoyed talking to you. It was a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on. And I hope we can stay in touch.
absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thanks.